Oh hey, Mr. Morris here. Today we're going to be talking about the structure of AQA's English Language Paper 1, Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. This is just a short video that goes over the content, structure and order of the exam and gives you some top tips on how to succeed. The exam is 1 hour and 45 minutes long. There are 5 questions and there are 80 marks total. You have one source to read. Now, because this is the fiction paper, the source is going to be an extract from a short story, often the opening. Once you've read the source, the first 4 questions will be about your understanding of it and analysis of the choices the writer made. The 5th question will be an opportunity for you to demonstrate your skill at creative writing. I'm going to go through each question and tell you what you need to do and how to gain the maximum number of marks. Starting with question 1. Question 1 is a comprehension and retrieval task. It asks you to read a short section of the text, usually about 4 or 5 lines, and find 4 things from that section. It's as easy as it sounds. All you have to do is write the 4 things it's asked you to find onto the 4 lines. The way to succeed in this question is to make sure you stick in the exact lines that it gives you. If you go outside, you'll get 0 marks for anything you take. The way to ensure you get a mark is to write in full sentences, starting with a capital letter and ending with a full stop. Alternatively, you can use quotes, as long as it's clear that you have put them in quote marks. Fragment sentences or single words tend to not get you the mark in this question. So if it asks you to find 4 things about the countryside and you just write trees or trees on the slope, you won't get the mark. Whereas if you write a full sentence, there were trees on the slope, you will. Question 2 is a language analysis question. It's worth 8 marks. Again, there will be a short section of the text that you are asked to focus on. The question is always the same. How does the writer use language to present sometimes a character, sometimes an object, sometimes the setting? This question is asking you about the choices the writer made with regards to language. And you're looking for all the usual suspects like similes, metaphors, personification, symbolism. If you can't find any of those things, then you can look at choices of individual words and say why the writer chose to use those words when they could have used other ones. Another thing you can look at is a shift in tone or mood. In the mark scheme, you gain marks for explaining clearly the effect of the choices the writer made, selecting a range of relevant quotes, and making clear and accurate use of subject terminology, which means the fancy words that we only use in English lessons. I recommend using the ECI structure, effect, choice, intention. And I've got another video talking in detail about how to use that structure. Question 3 is a structural analysis question. Unlike the first 2, you have to look at the entire text from start to finish. Just like question 2, you're still looking at the choices the writer made, but this time things like similes, metaphors, personification, or individual words won't get you any marks. You're looking at how the text has been structured, how it's been ordered, how it's been set out by the writer. For some people, it helps to think of the text as almost like a film, and us experiencing it almost through a camera lens. How is what is put on screen at every point ordered? The main thing you're looking for in this question is shifts in focus. What has the writer chosen to focus on at different sections of the text? A really good place to start would be beginning, middle, end. Does the focus change from the start, moving into the middle of the text, and finally does it change again at the end? When I say focus here, I mean, what are we seeing as the reader? What is the writer talking about at that point of the text? So for example, at the start of a text, they could introduce the main character, protagonist. This focus could then shift into the setting and where this character is. At the end, the focus could shift again to an exciting, inciting incident. Something could happen nearby, like an explosion or a car chase. Your job is to pick out these shifts in focus and to say why the writer has chosen to focus on this particular thing and why they've chosen to change it. The question is going to ask you, how did the writer structure the text to interest you as a reader? You need to take that interest as a pinch of salt, and you need to think up some synonyms, words that mean the same, for interest, such as engage, captivate, draw in, immerse. As well as shifts in focus, you can also look at shifts in time, shifts in place, and shifts in character. If you've mastered these shifts, you can look at other structural features, such as exposition, patterns and motifs, narrative perspective, and plot structure, such as linear and cyclical. Just like question 2, the mark scheme is assessing you for your explanation of the effects of the writer's choices, your use of references to the text, usually quotes, and your use of subject terminology. Question 4 is a big jump, mainly because it's worth 20 marks, which is the same as questions 1, 2, and 3 combined. For question 4, you are given a statement, sometimes by a student, sometimes by the author themselves. This statement will give an opinion about the text. It will usually contain 2 parts, and it will ask you to look at one specific section of the text. It will say something like, the end part of the text, from lines 24 to the end, shows that the main character made bad decisions and put everybody else in danger. To what extent do you agree? It's your job to evaluate this statement and to evaluate the text and the writer's choices that led to you making your decision about that statement. Make no mistake, you are expected to analyse language in this question, just like in question 2. You are expected to be able to find things like similes, metaphors, personification, hyperbole, all the usual language methods, techniques. The way to be successful in this question is respond to the statement. Say whether you agree or disagree, and then the key is explaining why you agree or disagree. I completely agree with this statement because. It's the because where you start to accumulate your marks. Because in line 25, the writer chose to use the simile, and there you start to talk about the effect of that choice and how that led to your decision about the statement. I like to use the structure EECI. Evaluate, effect on the reader, choice, intention of the writer. A top tip for evaluation is that using adverbs helps you to evaluate. Adverbs are words that usually end with ly, like completely, fully. Those type of adverbs suggest an amount. How much or how far do you agree? I agree completely with the statement. I partially agree with the statement. You can also evaluate the writer's choices themselves using adverbs, such as the writer subtly chose to use, or the writer cleverly chose. Something to remember is that there are 2 parts to the statement usually. You can talk about both parts separately, and you can agree with one part but not the other. Another top tip would be to spend some time agreeing with the statement, but also look at why people may disagree. Providing an alternative interpretation is a top-level skill. At the top end of the mark scheme, you get marks for being critical, for understanding the process behind writing and how writers make choices, and whether they are successful in those choices, whether the writer achieved what they were trying to achieve when they wrote this piece. The mark scheme here has 4 bullet points instead of 3. A clear and relevant response to the statement, clear understanding of writer's methods, a range of relevant textual details or quotes, and an evaluation on the effect on the reader. For questions 2, 3, and 4 on the mark scheme, there are levels. These levels are there to help the person marking your work by giving a guideline of what your work sounds like. For example, for all 3 questions, level 1 is described as simple and limited. Level 2 is described as some understanding. Level 3 is described as clear and relevant explanation. And level 4 is described as perceptive and detailed. You knowing those levels will help you out because you can ask yourself where your work falls into. Is my writing clear and relevant, or is it perceptive and detailed? Is my writing simple? Do I need to explain things more to develop my answer, to move up to the next level? Question 5 is no longer about the source that you're given to read. It's a writing task where you can show off your skills at creative writing. You are always given 2 questions and you need to choose one. And you're always given a picture that relates to one of the questions. Most often, one of the tasks is a story and the other is a description. Both tasks are usually linked at least partially to the story that you've read, either by topic or theme, but they've been known to throw curveballs and give you difficult pictures, tricky titles for your story, tasks that you might not expect, and sometimes it's difficult to see how they link, or you might not think they link at all. Question 5 is worth 40 marks, which is the same as questions 1, 2, 3, and 4 combined. It's such an important question that it's worth a quarter of your entire GCSE in English language. Unlike the other questions, this mark scheme is split into 2 sections, Assessment Objective 5 and Assessment Objective 6. Assessment Objective 5 is your content and organisation, and Assessment Objective 6 is your technical accuracy, what we usually call SPAG. To put that in a simpler way, AO5 is about your ideas and how you put them on the page in the order that you put them in, and AO6 is about whether you can follow the rules of writing. The mark scheme tells you what you get marks for. For AO5, you get marks for communicating clearly, matching your writing to the purpose and audience that you're given, choosing your vocabulary for effect, using linguistic devices, the same things that you were looking for in questions 2 and 4, your similes, metaphors, personification, symbolism, using structural features, like you were looking for in question 3, your shifts in focus at specific times, how you guide the story and what you choose to show the reader, whether you can write engagingly and connect your ideas into a coherent piece, one that makes sense and is logical, and whether you can use paragraphs accurately and whether you can link those paragraphs using discourse markers. For AO6, you're marked on whether you can punctuate your sentences properly with capital letters, full stops, and also whether you can use other types of punctuation. You need to use a range. It's tough to get past a level 4 without being able to use commas accurately. You might want to use question marks, speech marks occasionally, hyphens, colons, semicolons. Exclamation marks should only really be used if somebody's shouting. You get marked on whether you can write in standard English, which means avoiding slang and keeping things grammatically correct. You get marked on your spelling, but you also get marked again on your vocabulary choices. That means that your vocabulary choices are double weighted, which means it's better to try and use sophisticated words and spell them wrong than to only use simple words and spell them right, because there's double the amount of marks on offer. Some people think you can't teach and can't learn creative writing, but there are so many top tips on how to write successfully. One top tip is steal exciting words from the source that you've just read for section A, questions 1 to 4. Another is pre-plan some methods you're going to use. Write a list before you start writing in your plan of things you want to use and then tick them off. Metaphor, simile, personification, symbolism, hyperbole, onomatopoeia. Some people like to write lists of the sentences and tick off when they've used them to make sure they're not just focusing on sight. They've also thought about smell and hearing and touch too. Some people like to pre-plan to use a cyclical structure, knowing that they're going to end their writing in the same way that they begin it. My top tip is varying your sentence starters. Make sure you don't start all sentences with the or I, and I've got a video about that you can watch. So that's the structure of the exam. Remember, it's 80 marks and 1 hour and 45 minutes, which is 105 minutes. If it takes you 15 minutes to read the source accurately, that leaves you with 90 minutes for 80 marks. You can see that that's roughly 1 minute per mark. So for section A, questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, if you can aim to spend 1 minute per mark, that gives you time to plan your question 5. It's essential that you plan your question 5. If you start writing a story without thinking about the direction that it's going to go in, you're going to come unstuck. Or what I like to call write yourself into a corner, where the only way you can save your main character is having aliens arrive or somebody taking off a mask to reveal that it was the butler the whole time. Things like that are cliche, and you're getting marked on whether you can write something that's engaging and unique, not whether you can just churn the same things out that you've read before. Some teachers will advise that you start with question 5 because it's worth the most marks, finish with question 1 because it's worth the fewest. It doesn't really matter what order you do your questions in, but some people like to start with question 1 because they find it easy and getting those 4 marks in the bank makes them feel confident. Some people like to read the source first with a highlighter in their hand, highlighting and labelling any similes or metaphors they find, and highlighting any words that they want to steal to use in their own writing for question 5. The key thing here, though, is not to panic and to make sure you attempt every single question. The only way you guarantee that you're going to get 0 marks for a question is by missing it out. And if you miss out question 4, for example, that's 1/8 of your entire GCSE. So you need to plan your time carefully to make sure that you give yourself at least 1 minute per mark on each question. For example, if you are still on question 4 when you only have 40 minutes left in the assessment, you must move on to question 5 because there are so many more marks for you to gain than there are for you to lose. This has been a really short guide to AQA's English Language Paper 1. The best way to get better at this paper is practice. There's loads of past papers available online, and your English teacher will be able to point you in the right direction if you can't find them. You can also make up your own question 5s by taking any picture that you find on the internet and forcing yourself to describe it, or getting somebody to give you a random title like The Last Day I Saw Him and writing a story about it and timing yourself 40 minutes. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the comments below. Check out my other videos for other tips, and thanks for watching.